Okay, welcome to the next session of arrays. So in the previous section, we saw what is the definition of an array, and you saw few elements related to the definition of an array, like data structure, what do you mean by homogeneous elements, and so on. If you have not referred the video, please go back and refer the previous video, which tells you the definition of an array. So coming to the next topic, array is divided into two types. That's one-dimensional array and multi-dimensional array. As an example, we are taking two-dimensional array in the next upcoming concept. So that's a one-dimensional and multi-dimensional. So what exactly it is? So that's what we are going to see in the next upcoming session. So what is a one-dimensional array? The simplest form of an array is called as one-dimensional array. The simplest form of an array is called as one-dimensional array. And we can also say a one-dimensional array is nothing but a linear array. Okay, so the one what you are seeing in this diagram, and you can see that it contains a single row with multiple blocks. A single row with multiple blocks. So that means an array which contains only one subscript is called as one-dimensional array. An array which contains only one subscript is called one-dimensional array. I'll come to the topic of what do you mean by subscript later. So keep one thing in your mind. What is one-dimensional array? Any array in its simplest form is called as one-dimensional array, and the array which contains only one subscript is called as one-dimensional array. The representation is in front of you. A linear array is nothing but one-dimensional array. Okay, so what you are seeing in a diagram is a linear array. So what exactly is a subscript? We will see later as we move on. So now let us see how this array, or in precise a one-dimensional array. If we call array, it's nothing but one-dimensional array, because both are same. Array in the simplest form is one-dimensional array. How to declare one-dimensional array in the program? So you know why we use this arrays. If you want to collect a set of elements which are of same type, it cannot be done in variables, because variable can hold only one element, but here there are set of elements. Then we require the concept of arrays. So if your arrays has to be used in the program, like anything like a variable or like a function, a array has to be declared. So there should be a syntax for declaration. The syntax for declaration is here. So first you have to mention the data type of an array. That means what kind of an element you are going to collect in the array. Is it an integer? Is it a floating point number? Or is it a character? So you need to tell first line of the syntax, or first word of the syntax as the data type. So you know that basically if you want to collect a numbers, a whole number, then it is an integer type. That means int. Okay, if you want to store a character, then it should be a char type, so on. So that will be the data type. That's what he says. The type of the data, what an array should hold, is specified by this data type. As we all know, an array can store at a time only same data type element. So it can be either of any data type. It cannot be everything. It can be either of this. That means it can either be int, float, double, long, or it can also be an char. Okay, so that is what is data type. And next says after data type, it is followed by name of an array. So you know that anything we call in a program, we should name them. Okay, so when we name them, we should also follow the rules of identifiers. Okay, so similarly, what is array name? It is a valid name for an array which we should represent an array, right? So it should give a name to that. So it's a valid name for an array which follows the rules of identifiers. So followed by, So if you see the diagram above, it contains how many blocks, how many elements, 10 elements. So you should specify the size of an array. That means how many elements it can hold. That is what is the next thing. And whatever you see as a size, this is nothing but the subscript. How many subscripts are there? The square bracket is called as subscript. How many size are there? There are only one size. That means we are going to represent this size of an array, that is only one size, because it has got only one dimension. That means it's linear. Okay, it contains a row with 10 elements can be stored in that row. So since it's linear, it has only one subscript. So that is nothing but the meaning of it contains only one subscript. If you have only one size to an array name, they are called as one dimensional array. I hope it's quite clear for you how to declare an array. So first what you need to do, we need to mention data type. Okay, if you want to store numbers, what kind of a whole number, we need to specify the data type as int, then give a valid name. So you know what are the valid names, okay, according to the rules of it, then followed by size. So if you come to this example, here you can see what happens. Int name of an array is arr, size is 5. That means it can store how many elements in it? It can store given time 5 elements in it. Okay, and what type of elements it will be? Integer. That's what is this syntax. First is data type. Have we mentioned data type? Yes, int. What is the name? Array name. Array name, have we mentioned arr? Yes. Is it a valid name? Yes, of course it's a valid name. Next, how many elements you are going to specify? How many size? What is the size? That is 5. This is what is a declaration of an array. Okay, if they ask you declaration of array or declaration of one dimensional array, it's a one and the same, because array is one dimensional array is the simplest form of array. Okay, so this is what is declaration. Now we are not going to learn only declaration here, we are also going to see how is it defined. So once you write this particular line, you need to create memory for 5 elements, and that allocation of memory for 5 elements is nothing but defining an array. An array is defined when size is allocated to it. So as soon as you write this declaration line, it will also allocate a size, or it will also define a size for that particular array. So let us see how is it defined. Okay, you have seen in the previously how is it been declared, what are the things you require to declare an array as a syntax wise. Now we are going to see how is it going to allocate the memory. So taking this as an example, now an arr is going to have how many blocks? 5 blocks. Okay, and each block contains what type of data? Integer data. So now carefully observe, as soon as this line is encountered, compiler will allocate first continuous block of memory. These blocks will be in continuous memory location. Okay, of size, what should be the size of each block, or what is the size of the entire block? So before making it small size, we need to know what is the size of entire block. So how many elements you need to store? 5 elements. So the formula is size into what type of elements are all the 5 elements? They are of int. So we mentioned a built-in function called as size of int. Why int? Since it is int. If the same thing, if it would have been like this, float arr of 5, or yeah, arr of 5. So the thing what it's going to be changed was, since it is float, how many elements? Yeah, even here it is 5 elements, because the size is 5. 5 into size of float. Size of float and size of integer are different. Even though they are storing 5 elements, the amount of space required to store a float is much larger than int. So as you all already know, integer uh, is going to store integer is going to store integer's size is, what is the integer size? Integer size is 4 bytes. Okay, according to the system architecture. It can be either 2 bytes or 4 bytes. As in this generation, we generally say that size of int as 4 bytes. So compiler will allocate how much memory, continuous memory location of how much memory. 5 into 5 is a number of elements into size of integer, since it's store integer. So always keep size of integer is 4 bytes. So how many bytes are reserved? 20 bytes. As a whole, it is reserved 20 bytes. But each block takes how many bytes? It takes 4 bytes, since it is integer. I hope you got what is the meaning of definition of an array. It is declared using the syntax, data type, array name, and mentioning the size. Once it is declared, compiler should allocate a memory to it. So it has to be defined. How does it allocate memory? First it sees what is the size of an array. Size of an array into what type of an element you are going to store in those 5 elements. So you need to tell size of operator followed by, if I am going to store integer, then I have to mention integer. So it will be 5 into 4 bytes, that is 20 bytes. Now the next question is, what we need to think, can I define the size as float? Of course, no, not possible, because size is what? Size is a positive integer. It tells what? We can't store element in fractions. We can store element as a whole. Okay. So if element can be stored as a whole, then we need to specify the size also as a whole number. So we cannot specify size of array as some floating point number. Next, can I store a character inside the subscript as in size? Not possible. So size cannot be anything apart from integer. So I hope so you understood after this concept how to declare an array, and what do you mean by defining array. How is it defined? When the compiler allocates the size for this array declaration, we say that as a define. How much size will be allocated? It will be based on what is your size of an array and what type of data do you store in that array. That is 5 into size of 8. Okay. And can we store floating point as a size? No. Can we store any type apart from integer as a type? No. It should be always integer. That means the size of an array is specified by any positive integer. Keep that carefully in your mind. Size can be only a positive integer or an expression which leads to a positive integer. What is this expression? So look at this one by one. So look at this particular declaration. We have written int ARR of 5. That is common. That is the simplest way, where you have data type, array name, and a size. When it comes to the next example, we can see inside the subscript, we are not writing a single value. We are writing a mathematical expression, 5 plus 5. Since it's an expression which leads an answer as a single value. So what is 5 plus 5? 10. So that array size will be 10. It is also valid. So when it comes to a third, same way, like how you added in the previous example, here you are multiplying, and even after multiplying, it will be a single simple integer value. So this is also correct. So look at this example. What we have done is we have taken a variable a and we have allocated a size using that variable a, where a is equal to 21 divided by 3. So what is 21 divided by 3? That is 7. 7 is stored as a. Now a is used as a subscript. So it will be array of 7. So it's correct. Yes, it's also a whole number. So you can specify size as a number. And at last, you can see we have one more example which has a size as negative number. So if you remember, I clearly say that the size of an array is specified by a positive integer. So negative integer as a size, it cannot be accepted by the arrays in C language. So you cannot have negative values as a size in an array. Okay. So that's what is how to declare and define an array. Okay. So this is not a valid. Now we need to access them. So how to access them? So if I want to access the first element, so keep in your mind, accessing an element of an array is not by their name, because you have only one name for an array. With this name, they are in different locations. That means they are in different index. So first index of an array will always be from 0. The first element, if you want to access, you need to call 0. How much is the size of an array here? 5. So since it begins from 0, the 5 elements are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the last element will be always size minus 1. If size is 5, the last element will be size minus 1. That means it will be having an index of 4. So how to access an array elements? You can access their array elements by their index. Okay, so ARR of 2 will get you the value inside ARR of 2. Okay, ARR of 4 will get you the value inside the fourth index, so on. So how to access elements in an array? Through their index. So in case if you want to access first element, so which is the first element? 0. So you have to simply write name of an array, that is ARR. Look at this array name, and then you need to specify which indexed element you want. I want indexed element at 0. Similarly, if you want to access second element is not 2. Second element is according to the index, it is 1. So you can just write array of 1 and so on. So on, you can go till end of an array. The only one important thing what you need to remember is while accessing an element, elements accession can be possible only via their index. That's what it says, array name of index. And remember that index begins with 0 and it goes up to the end via the formula size minus 1. Okay, since it's size minus 1 because it is beginning from 0. So this is what is how to access the element. Now we have the last topic of this one dimensional array, that is how to initialize an array. This is a very important topic. What is the meaning of initialization is how to store some values to this array. Okay, how can we store or how can we assign some values to array? So we have seen that declaration, as soon as this line has been written, it creates an empty array with allocating the size. Okay, it allocates the size also, but the array is ready, but there is no elements in it because we have not given any values to that element. Now in the next session, that is what we are going to see, how to initialize an array. What is initialization mean? Specifying elements into an array is called as initialization of an array. Since after declaration, we have clearly seen once you declare, the block of memory is allocated, but we are not having any set of elements. So this set of elements can be initialized in 4 ways. So how? So look at the first step. In the method 1, we are initializing in the program array of 5 is equal to, in flower braces, 1, 2, 5, 67, 32. So all these 5 elements can be stored in array of 5. Okay, so this is the one of the method of initialization, assigning the value to an array using flower braces. Okay, the second method is, you can see, compare it with the first method. In the first method, we have clearly specified size 5. So that means you can have only 5 numbers. You cannot extend it. Okay, because you have clearly said ARR of 5. So it doesn't go beyond 5 numbers. But whereas in method 2, if you just specify without size, you can either store 1 element, 2 element, 3 element, 100 elements, n elements, or you cannot store, you can store any number of elements. You can store any number of elements. So that means method 2 is comparatively good than method 1. Okay, the way of initialization is same. Initializing, so now 1, 2, 5, 67, 13, which will be the index of 1? It will be 0. Which will be index of 32? Since it's starting from 0, how many elements are there? 5 elements. So the last index will be 5 minus 1, that is 4. Okay, so this is method 1. In method 1, we initialize an array along with its size. Whereas in method 2, we initialize an array without size. So the advantage over declaration without size is we can extend the numbers beyond by not caring much about size, because we haven't specified the size. Where you stop, that much will be the size of an array. That is the advantage of method 2. Whereas in method 1, if you have initialized the size, declared the size, then you can store only elements of that particular size. Okay, so that is what method 2. And method 3 is, instead of writing everything in one line, like you all know in which index 1 is there, array of 0, which index 2 is there, array of 1. We write it one by one. Array of 0 is equal to 1, array of 1 is equal to 2, array of 2 is equal to 5. And by looking at this only, we can understand it's a very tedious job, because if the array contains more elements, suppose 1000 elements, this approach is not valid, because you need to enter each and every elements along with its index, so it's impossible. That is the third approach. First method with size initializing, second method without size initializing. The advantage of second method over first method is, once you have initialized the size, then you can only store that many elements, whereas here you can extend the size. And third method is that, instead of writing it in one line, we write it separately through their index representation. So we will represent them through their index and assign the value. That is method 3. Whereas coming to method 4, so all the method 1, method 2, method 3 are programmatically controlled. Okay, that means you have initialized them in the programs. Whereas when it comes to method 4, it is controlled during execution. It is not controlled during compilation, because program is constantly written. If you want to change any elements, you should go to the program and change. Whereas when it comes to method 4, this is a way of dynamically handling the arrays. That means, instead of writing the values in the program, here in this method we ask user to enter. So you know that user should keep on entering how many elements, n elements. So you should have a loop which contains a scanf statement. Scanf because it's the statement which takes input, and how many times it should take inputs, you have to take n number of time. For example, in this case, how many numbers, 5 numbers, so you should enter 5 numbers, so it will go up to 0 to 5. And scanf statement, where will be the first element stored, that is 1 in array of 0. Okay, second element will be stored in array of 1, so on. Okay, so this is the method 4. Method 4 is comparatively better than all the other methods, because we are making the user to enter the values during execution time. Okay, whereas if we write that in a program, that is constant. If you run it today or tomorrow or any time, the values of that array will be constant. Okay, so that is what is method 4. Method 4 is what, if you want the user to enter the values to an array, then you have to use a loop and a scanf statement. I hope you understood how to initialize an array. And as I said, method 3 is not preferable, because it is a lengthiest procedure. Now the question is, what if number of elements are lesser than length specified? What exactly he means. So look at the carefully this particular line. How much is the size of an array? 10. That means I can store in ARR 10 elements. But how many elements are actually stored? 6 elements are stored. So that means you have another 4 elements with no values. So if it happens, that means if you store number of elements lesser than the size, the rest of the values, so that means out of 10 you have occupied 6 cells, the rest of the values will be occupying 0 as its value. I hope you're getting it. If you are going to specify only lesser elements after mentioning a huge size of array, then the rest of the elements will be 0 in it. Okay, because 0 doesn't have any value. I hope this is understood. That means if the number of elements are lesser than length specified, the remaining locations of the array are automatically filled by 0. So keep a good practice while declaration. When you declare an array, even though whether it contains a value or not, try to initialize them. Okay, here we are initializing 0 to all the 10 elements. So all the 10 elements initially will be 0. So once it gets updated, each locations will be updated. Okay, each things will be updated. So keep one thing in your mind: when you specify array of 10 is equal to 0, all the 10 elements will be 0. And then after this, if you give this, it will overwrite all the values and replace 0. And only since 6 elements has to be replaced, the rest of the 4 elements will be 0. And keep in your mind one more thing, that it's very illegal to declare an array with empty braces. For example, this. You're not supposed to declare an array with empty braces because junk values will be initialized. So to avoid that, try to initialize them by 0. So there won't be junk values, there will be 0 value. That means which doesn't have any weightage. Okay. And another illegal thing is, don't specify the size less and include more elements than size. That's nothing but opposite of this. Here we had more size but occupied only less cells, whereas here you have less size but occupied more cells. This is also illegal. Okay, so this is how you initialize the array. How many methods you studied? 4 methods you have studied. Which is better? Fourth one is better. Which is worst? Third one is worst. So I have said you clearly why it's worst and why it is best. Okay, since the user is entering this value during execution point of time, this has the weightage compared to other where it is programmatically assigned the values. Okay, both gives you output, but the better way is to enter the value to an array during execution time. And next we have seen what are the illegal thing happens if you don't declare it properly. That means if you declare an array of larger size and utilize only less amount of elements, then the rest of the elements will be mentioned as 0. So here out of 10 elements I have mentioned 6, and you can see the rest of 4 will be initialized to 0. To make them initialized to 0, always make a good practice of declaring an array. As soon as you declare an array, you just initialize that to 0, whereas don't declare them with empty braces. And another illegal thing is you can't have lesser size and include more number of elements. So these are the 4 ways of initializing an array what we have seen. There is another way, and that is the last way. It's called as designated initializer. 4 methods, and this is the 5th method. So what do you mean by designated initializer? So look at this array carefully. More than numbers, there are more zeros. That means only few cells have occupied the number, rest of them is 0. So it's a little more effort to enter all these elements one by one. We need to actually enter only 3 numbers, that is 1, 2 and 3 in their respective location, and rest of them should be automatically given as 0. So you know that automatically when you close the thing, the automatically it is set to 0. So what exactly this means is, I need not enter all the 10 values like 1 0 0 0 2 3 0 0. I need not enter that. I need to enter only those values which are occupied. The first cell is occupied. Okay, so what I do is, in the 0th position we have 1 in position 0 and 2 in position 5 and 3 in position 6, and rest of the things are 0. 1, the number 1, the data value 1 is in which position? 0th index. The data value 2 is in which index? 5. The data value 3 is in 6. So if you want to initialize only those things and rest of them should have to be 0, then we have to go for designated initializers. What do you mean by that? Sometime we want our array to be initialized in the following form. How great would be if we don't want to write it explicitly zeros. That means if we need not write entire array and we need not mention zeros explicitly, it would have been a great function. That means whichever position as a value, enter only those, rest of them will become automatically 0. It would have been great, and that is made possible using designated initializers. So look at this, how designated initializers work. When you declare an array, explicitly mention in the square bracket where you need to designate the value. I need to designate 1 in which position? 0. So mention 0 in a subscript equal to 1. Next element come in which index? 5th index. So mention subscript 5 and initialize a value what has to be mentioned, stored in the 5th location. So whatever you are seeing in a square bracket, they are nothing but designators. Okay, and this method of initialization is called as designated initializers. That means they are initializing the value to an array only in a required locations. So all the other locations will be 0 in an array. Okay, so this is what is designated initializers. Advantages of this is we are least bothered about how many zeros are there. We are bothered only about the numbers. Okay, so we are least bothered because if you mention those designator and store their values in the designators, we need not worry about any other things. Okay, so that's what is the first advantage. Second advantage is no need to bother about the order. We know that always we say that array of 0 first, array of 1 first, array of second first. Look at this thing. In the 0th position, we have 1, and in 5th position, we have 2. The same line can be rewritten. First, we can write 5 is equal to 2 and 0 is equal to 1. So that means both are same. And next thing, what you should be careful about designated initializers is keep in your mind, if you designate the length of an array is n, then the designator can be from 0 to n minus 1. If the length of the designator is n, it can be having a designator from 0 to n minus 1. That means if you can see int a of 5, so the last index of this will be 4. Since it's a of 5, you can store element in 0th designator. Yes, 4 can be stored. You can store 78 in 4th designator too. Okay, but whereas in the second step, int a of 5, we have stored 4 in 0th position, but there is no chance of 5th index. Size is 5, but index will be only 5 minus 1. If you initialize it, then you need to be little careful. Okay, so you can store only the array in length of array n. We can designate only array between 0 to n minus 1. Okay, so altogether how many ways you can initialize? You can initialize method 1, method 2, method 3, method 4, and finally we have last initializer, that is designated initializer. Those values where you require, those places where you require values, designate them using square bracket and value name. Rest of the things will automatically take 0 in respect to designated element initializers. Okay, so we have seen advantage. We are least bothered of how many zeros are there. We are least only bothering about how many elements are set. And next thing, we need not worry about the order, because we always say array should be in order. Here in case you can mention 0th index and 5th index first, for 5th index and 0 index later. Okay, so that's left to the, that's one and the same. And one more thing what you need to be careful about is that if integer array is declared, then designators can be of size 5 is declared, then designator can be from 0 to 5 minus 1, that is 0 to 4. If any designator is allocated more than 4, it is not going to be taken. Okay, so we have seen in this video how to declare and initialize an one dimensional array or simple array. Okay, so in the next coming topic, we will see what is two-dimensional array, how to declare and initialize two-dimensional array. Thank you.